So it's the second week of December. Our theme for the month is Holy Days. That's where we get to celebrate the holy days from many different spiritual and religious traditions, which really warms my heart, and that's really part of our teaching, is we take truth from everywhere. And so today is Bodhi Day. That's the day where Siddhartha Gautama sat underneath a fig tree, achieved enlightenment, and from that point forward became known as the Buddha. But before we get started, does anyone know why Buddhists never have to vacuum the corners of their house? Because they don't have attachments. But as I was saying, I really like that we're celebrating, and we do celebrate, all the different spiritual and faith traditions. And it's important because we keep saying, people keep asking, well, we don't know what to tell people when we go out in the world, what we're about. And it's interesting because I gave you a quote 4 weeks ago, and then people told me, Nicole gave you the same quote last week, and people outside said, you know, Reverend Nicole found this great quote. I don't know where she dug it from. I've never heard it before. And I don't know if it's the repetition factor in there, or maybe your beautiful, effervescent presence on stage. But I'm going to give it to you again, because the more we talk about this, the easier it is for us to not have nothing to say. All of you that I know have plenty to say here if people ask you, what do you guys believe in? So this is from Dr. Ernest Holmes, the founder of the science mind philosophy that we love and study here. They asked him, what is religious science? And he says, religious science is a correlation of laws of science, opinions of philosophy, and revelations of religion applied to human needs and the aspirations of man. And so we're definitely all inclusive. And so we had a great day here Friday. Leslie, would you please stand? Yeah. So we did the parade. And this beautiful, lovely, and energetic young lady put the whole thing together within 2 weeks. There's plenty of love, plenty of spirit, lots of fun, and everyone had a good time. Thank you, Leslie.
Thank you.
And she did such a good job, I was cajoled enough to be the cowardly lion again. And Reverend Nicole was Glinda the Good Witch. And it was really funny because the little 3- and 4-year-olds were waving at me saying, we love you, lion. And the sparkle in her eyes of seeing Nicole thinking she's the princess that turned into the queen. And these signs are about our parade. We use these signs in our parade to tell people who we are. And the one that speaks to me, that's so important to me, is that we're radically inclusive. We tell you, Reverend Nicole told you today, that we believe, and Ernest Holmes believed this, among others, that there's a golden thread of truth that weaves its way through all the spiritual traditions, all the philosophy, and all the science. And that's why we're inclusive, because if we were exclusive, we would not get the entire truth. So every one of you is a revealer of divine truth. And when we come together on Sunday, we honor that. And so we're talking about the life of the Buddha today. And Buddhism is interesting because I don't know about you, but they sort of raise the bar in terms of being disciplined and having extreme mindfulness. And I got these quotes attributed to the Buddha that sort of we believe in, but it's sort of like, really, that's pretty hard. And the first one is, you will not be punished for your anger, you'll be punished by your anger. All these things we really believe in. The second one reminds me of something my dad would tell me. The only real failure in life is not to be true to the best one knows. So they set the bar up pretty high, and I'm going to tell you a little bit about the younger part, the early part of the Buddhist life. But the thing he had going for him, he was in the Hindu tradition, especially as far as we're concerned, because Dr. Ernest Holmes told us we're as close to the Hindu traditions in our philosophy as anyone, because they're the ones who first had this concept of the unitive mind beyond all things. And Ernest Holmes, and my favorite Hindu mystic, Sri Aurobindo, always says that consciousness is the ground of all being. So in the words of the Buddha, when he's talking about mind, tell me if this doesn't sound like us. All that we are is the result of what we have thought. The mind is everything. What we think, we become. Doesn't that sound like something that we would teach in a class here? And so the early life of the Buddha is interesting because when Siddhartha was very young, a Hindu yogi came to his father and he says, "Your son is a Chakravarti." And a Chakravarti is known as a world turner, very powerful person. And he says he's going to be a very, very powerful emperor or very, very powerful sage. From that point forward, Siddhartha's father did not want a sage because they wander the streets starving to death. They're very powerful spiritually. So from that point forward, he created this safe place, beautiful but safe, that Siddhartha would be in. Siddhartha had the best of food, the best of clothes, lots of servants. And then when Siddhartha turned 19 years old, his dad arranged for a marriage with a beautiful woman. And that worked all fine, and Siddhartha was in his comfort zone. And 10 years had passed. Siddhartha has his beautiful infant son by then. And he tells his servant, he says, "I want to go out and see the world." So the servant, obedient, became his charioteer. He pulled him in the chariot. And then Siddhartha started to see things that caused him dismiss. So the first thing they saw was a very, very old man. And Siddhartha says, "What's with that?" And the servant says, "Siddhartha, when you live this life experience, that happens to us all. We all get old." And he had never seen that before. And he had been in this lap of luxury. They go on, and he sees a very sick man. Almost the same question, almost the same answer. The servant says, "Siddhartha, we all get sick. Even you will get sick." And then they go on. And it's not getting any better for Siddhartha, because they see a funeral procession, and he sees a corpse. Same question, same answer. At the end of the life experience, we all become that. And then they see one more thing, and this is probably something that Siddhartha's dad wished he would have never seen. He sees an ascetic yogi starving to death, walking with his begging bowl, leading the spiritual life. And so that was a lot for him to take in. So he went back, and he was okay for a while. And about a year later, something happened inside of him. He knew he had to leave his life of luxury. So he snuck out in the middle of the night, left his beautiful wife and his beautiful son, and followed the yogis as they wandered around. He was born in present-day Nepal in about 300 to 400 before the Common Era. Wandered around that area. And so he went to different yoga schools. And yoga is much different than we have it in Southern California, where it's 60 minutes and you do a certain type of yoga and you're done. These are people who just wandered the country, reading scripture, and a lot of them were of the ascetic disposition, which means that they gave up looking for food. Now, they were fed because they would wander by villages, and the people there would honor them for taking the spiritual path and feed them. And so Siddhartha went through 8 different schools and wandered with them. And his question always was, why do we suffer? Why do we suffer? And he never did get the answer that he wanted. And so at the end, he realized that the intellectual path was not doing it for him. So he made a decision that he would stay there under the fig tree until he got his answers and achieved enlightenment. And it's like one of my best teachers in ministerial school said, any spiritual religious tradition is not valuable unless it means something to you this very day in your present life. And so for me, we all sort of have lived part of the life of Siddhartha. We all have this upbringing where there's some structure. Some of us have very nurturing upbringing. Some of us have not so nurturing upbringings, and there's some stress in our early life and our family situation. There comes a point, almost like a rite of passage, where we go out in the world and we see reality, and reality hits us in the face. If we had a bad upbringing, maybe that reality is there's some love out there. But I think for most of us, we have a bit of a nurturing upbringing, and we see the reality, the cruelty that exists in the world. And then we, I think, go on an intellectual pursuit trying to figure it out with our mind. And I think most of you, that is what brought you to the first CSL seat center you ever took in a CSL center, because your current religious situation wasn't working, your philosophy wasn't working, and you wanted a better way to do things. And you proceeded things on an intellectual way. But then there comes a time when you can't figure everything out in your head. And you have to take the step that Siddhartha took. You have to step out on faith. What we talk about here is before we do our affirmations or spiritual mind treatment or affirmative prayer, we try and commune with the divine. If we commune first and then command, we're much better off. So that was Siddhartha's experience, and the best part of the story is the day that he achieved all the wisdom and the enlightenment. And I'm going to let Reverend Nicole tell you that part of the story. Thank you.
You look so mischievous when you're coming down the stairs. Uh-oh. That's funny. Thank you, Reverend Michael. Oh, what I realized is one of the best parts about being right here is that in this month of discovering and looking into these different holidays, these different sacred days for people around the world, is that I get to do the research and the figuring out what space it can fill in me before I bring it to you. So I've had time to absorb it and find its meaning in my life. And so for that, I'm going to say thank you, because if you weren't here, I wouldn't be doing that. Well, maybe in another way, but anyway, so I want to share with you a bit about Bodhi Day. And there are many different paths in Buddhism, just like how there's different denominations of Christianity. And so a lot of these different paths celebrate the day of the Buddha's enlightenment at different times, depending on the lunar holiday. But a lot of them celebrated December 8th, so that would be yesterday. So that's why we're celebrating it today. And I think this is such a powerful expression, just like last week's was, just like with the Syrians and the Jews. I think this expression and experience of awakening is so powerful for every one of us. And so Buddha actually means, Bud means intellect, and Da means above. So in awakening, we are moving above the intellect. We are becoming enlightened too. And I think we can translate that into our science of mind philosophy by saying that we are each metaphysicians, meta meaning beyond, and physician being the physical, right? So we think and act and believe in that which is beyond the physical, as the Buddha believes and thinks and acts beyond the intellect. And I think that's very similar in recognizing and knowing that there is a deeper truth, a more spiritual truth than just this plain material world that we live in. And I want to share with you this experience and story of the Enlightenment. So many different parts of it I could see playing out in my life, and probably you can too. So you go from being this prince, right? And you've got everything you want, and everything's perfect, to all the way overcorrecting to being skin and bones, trying like all these different forms of yoga. I mean, really weird ones, guys, that I won't even talk about. But like drinking urine and weird stuff. There is some weird stuff, okay? And starving themselves to death. There's all these different ways that they were trying to find some meaning, some truth. And how many of us have overcorrected? We were like on one side, and then instead of just finding a middle path, we're like, oh no, I'm absolutely over here, you know? I do that with dieting, right? I'm like, oh, I'll eat whatever I want, whatever. And then all of a sudden it's like, 1,000 calories, that's it. And then I'm cranky and have a headache, and you know how it goes. So, or maybe you don't, I don't know. But that's what I'm talking about, that there is a middle path, and that's what the Buddha came to find out. So one day, skin and bones, tiny, tiny man, with his 5 disciples, 5 people who were following him because they thought, God, he can fast for this long. He must be a sage, right? And so finally he finds this fig tree, which is now, famously known as a Bodhi tree, and he sits under it because he's just tired and he's done. And he says, you know what? I'm going to sit here, and I'm either going to find the meaning of life, the meaning of my existence, or I'm going to die. Like, that's it. I'm done. And so he sits in meditation, and then there's this story that I hope you take very symbolically in your life and what I'm about to say. But there's a story that goes with this experience of him and in Siddhartha's journey sitting here becoming the Buddha. And it's with Mara. And Mara is this demon monster with like 8 arms, and he's roaring at the Buddha, or at Siddhartha at the time, and he's saying, you can't do this. You're not good enough. And he's throwing daggers at the Buddha, and they, by the time they get to him, they turn into flowers. And he stays in meditation, and this is making him so mad. This is making Mara so angry that he sends his 3 voluptuous daughters to come and seduce the Buddha and tempt him into coming out of meditation. And still, he remains seated and in meditation and keeping his mind clear and waiting for truth to be revealed to him. And so now Mara's really mad. And it's like, and he says, who will witness you? And the Buddha says nothing again, but he has his hands up in meditation. And he places 2 hands on the ground, on the earth. And the earth shakes, and it roars, and it says, I will witness him. And the Buddha's eyes opened, and his disciples saw that he was gleaming, which is why we see all those mudras of a fat Buddha. It's because of the aura that he had. But check this out. Then he opens his eyes, and the first thing he said is, somebody go make me some food. And his disciples were like, what? We thought you were this sage, this great enlightened person, and now you want food? And he's like, I figured it out. It's not about starving yourselves. Anyway, they left him. So how many times has that happened to you? When you're starting and you're starting to understand that there's more to life than just making a bunch of money, or there's more to life than looking this way or being with that person or having this car or doing this, and you start to really work on your own inner development, and then your friends who were so close to you are like, you're different, or what's wrong with you, or you've changed. How many times has that happened to you guys? It's happened to anybody here? Yeah, we change. Yes. And how often, how many of you have sat in meditation for just a couple minutes and those little demon voices start popping up in your head? Oh, to-do list. Oh, you have other things to do. Oh, you don't need to be here. It's like, come on, right? But I know that every one of us has experienced at least one sliver of a moment where that veil was lifted and we're like, oh, I get it. I get it. And so I want to share with you the four noble truths that came out of this enlightenment where Siddhartha became a Buddha. And I know, and I believe that each one of us in our own way, at our own time on our spiritual journey, can become a Buddha in our own lives, that we can move beyond the intellect and awaken to the truth of who we are. So the first noble truth is suffering. Yes, we suffer. It says, life always involves suffering in obvious and subtle forms. Even when things seem good, we always feel an undercurrent of anxiety and uncertainty. I can definitely relate to that. There is definitely suffering in this world. The second noble truth is the cause of suffering. This is where some clarity comes in here, because the cause of suffering is our cravings, our desire for material goods. It's our desire to be beautiful and to have everything be good all the time. And it's our fundamental ignorance of the fact that we are one. It's our fundamental ignorance in believing that we are separate and apart and different, not different, individuals. We are not individuals. We are individualized expressions of one power, one good, one God, one divine intelligence. And when we can begin to transform that mental thinking into a heart realization that we are connected so much deeper than we could ever imagine. We are one. And in really coming to understand that, really coming to feel that, releases us from some of that suffering. So, don't worry, it gets better. The third noble truth is that it's possible to end this suffering. The good news is that our suffering is temporary. It's like a cloud that's passing over the light, the sun, that is us, that is our consciousness, that is our enlightenment. And a cloud passing over it, it obscures it for a moment, but not forever. And the truth is, beyond that cloud, there is always that light shining. And I feel like this is where Ernest Holmes got the idea that the end of suffering seems so big, but the simple fact that we can begin to release our suffering by knowing that there's a truth beyond it, it reminds me of what Ernest Holmes said when he said, we believe in the emancipation of freedom from discord of every nature, and that it's sure to be attained by all. And again, I'll say that in a different way, that we believe in the complete freedom from suffering of every nature. And this is sure to be attained by all. That is a really big idea. That feels really far away sometimes. The complete freedom from suffering for all of us? and he's certain of it. That is where I feel like he got this from, is the end of suffering. Because the fourth noble truth is the path. And this is how we live in the expression of releasing the suffering. The path, living ethically, practicing meditation and developing wisdom can be exactly what releases us from our suffering. Being ethical, practicing meditation, developing wisdom. What we're doing here by coming together, by learning and growing together, by having morals and ethics. That's one of the things I love most about Buddhism, is the 5 precepts, which I won't go into. But that's their moral and ethical standards that they live by. And it is so powerful. And I feel like if each one of us lived by those precepts, we would be free. We would be truly free, and we would know our freedom because we would be living it. So I just want to share with you guys, those were the 4 noble truths, and I want to share with you my most sacred altar piece, because it means so much to me. And I thought during this time of sharing these holy days that I would create kind of an altar here for us. Yeah. And so this is a mudra of the earth witnessing Buddha. And you see one palm is up and one is touching the earth. And what this reminds me every morning is that I am always open to what I call Father Universe. And at the same time, I am always steadied by Mother Earth. That Mother God that is solid and is steady. And yet open to that more, that divine universe that is always becoming in us. We are always becoming. I don't care where we've been. I don't care what we've been through. We are always becoming. That is the freedom and release of this idea of awakening. And so I want to invite us to just move into an affirmative prayer to solidify these ideas, to solidify this truth, this awakening within us, this moving beyond the physical, beyond the intellect, and into that vibration, that higher vibration in consciousness, knowing that there is one. There is one mind, there is one great good, there is one God, there is one intelligence, and we, like a matrix, are all interconnected parts and aspects of it. We are quantum particles jumping in and out of existence with each other. And the residue of our environment, of our atmosphere, falls upon each other. And so I lift each and every one of us in this room up, holding us in the light and the love and the truth of our being, knowing that that residue goes out and it smears all over the entire world. One person after another is touched by the good, by the awakened one within you, within me. Let's just breathe into that. And for knowing the truth and for having those slivers of clarity and those moments where the veil is revealed, I say thank you. Thank you, Mother, Father, God. Thank you for this life. And so it is.